When we talk about desire in a relationship, we often imagine it as something spontaneous, something that either exists or fades with time. But desire is not as mysterious as we sometimes believe. It grows in very particular psychological conditions. It grows where there is trust. It grows where there is emotional safety. And it grows where two people feel free enough with each other to be vulnerable. This is why betrayal or prolonged distance can feel so destabilizing. Because it doesn't simply create conflict in a relationship, it disrupts the very foundation on which desire was built. Think about what desire requires from us. Desire asks us to open ourselves to another person emotionally, physically, psychologically. It asks us to reveal parts of ourselves that we do not show to the rest of the world. It requires a willingness to be seen, and that willingness depends heavily on trust. Trust creates the environment where intimacy can exist without fear. It allows us to relax into connection. It allows affection, curiosity, and erotic energy to flow without constant self-protection. But betrayal changes this landscape almost instantly. When someone experiences betrayal, whether through infidelity, emotional withdrawal, broken promises, or long periods of neglect, the psychological impact is rarely limited to the specific event itself. What is shaken is the sense of safety that once made vulnerability possible. The mind begins to reinterpret everything through a new lens. Questions appear that did not exist before. Can I trust what I feel? Can I trust what I see? Can I trust the person standing in front of me? This uncertainty changes the emotional climate of the relationship. Where there was once ease, there may now be caution. Where there was openness, there may now be restraint. And in that climate, desire often retreats. Not because love has disappeared, and not necessarily because attraction has vanished. Desire retreats because the psychological environment that once supported it has become unstable. When people feel emotionally threatened, their instinct is not to open themselves further. Their instinct is to protect themselves. Protection and desire rarely occupy the same space at the same time. This is one of the most misunderstood aspects of relationships after betrayal or distance. Many couples believe that if they simply resolve the conflict, if they talk it through, apologize, or move forward, desire should naturally return. But desire does not operate like a switch that can be turned back on. Desire is deeply connected to emotional trust. And trust, once broken, does not repair itself instantly. Distance can create a similar effect, though it unfolds in a quieter way. When partners grow emotionally distant over time, through stress, routine, unresolved conflict, or simple neglect, the relationship may begin to feel less like a space of intimacy and more like a space of coexistence. Two people continue sharing a life, but something subtle shifts in their connection. The emotional warmth that once fueled desire begins to cool. Conversations become practical rather than intimate. Touch becomes occasional rather than spontaneous. And gradually, partners may begin to feel like strangers occupying the same space. This emotional distance affects desire in ways that are not always immediately visible. Desire depends on emotional presence. It thrives when two people feel psychologically engaged with each other, when they feel seen, valued, and connected. When that engagement fades, desire often follows. But here is an important truth that many couples overlook. The disappearance of desire after betrayal or distance is not necessarily a sign that the relationship is beyond repair. In many cases, it is simply the natural psychological response to emotional disruption. The human mind is remarkably adaptive. When trust feels uncertain, it slows down vulnerability. When emotional safety feels compromised, it protects itself. Understanding this is essential because it shifts the conversation from blame to awareness. Instead of asking, "Why don't I feel desire anymore?" a more useful question becomes, "What happened to the emotional environment that once allowed desire to exist?" This question invites a deeper exploration of the relationship. It acknowledges that desire is not an isolated emotion. It is connected to trust, connection, emotional safety, and the sense that the relationship is a place where both people can reveal themselves honestly. When betrayal or distance occurs, those foundations must often be rebuilt before desire can return naturally. This rebuilding process begins with recognition, not minimizing the pain, not pretending the disruption didn't happen, but acknowledging the emotional impact honestly. Because when couples are willing to face the reality of what has been broken, when they understand that desire did not disappear randomly but responded to a real shift in trust, they create the possibility for something important to happen next. They create the possibility for repair. And repair is not simply about restoring what once existed. Sometimes it is about building a deeper understanding of each other than the relationship ever had before. Because the moment you recognize that desire depends on emotional safety, you also recognize that rebuilding trust is not just about saving the relationship. It is about creating the conditions where intimacy can live again. And the first step in reclaiming desire is not forcing passion back into the relationship. The first step is restoring the emotional ground where desire has a reason to return. When betrayal or prolonged distance enters a relationship, something subtle but deeply unsettling often begins to happen. The person you once knew intimately, the person whose habits, expressions, and emotions felt familiar, can suddenly begin to feel strangely unfamiliar. It is as if the psychological map you once used to navigate the relationship no longer works the way it used to. This shift is not only about the event itself, it is about perception. Relationships are built on a certain assumption of knowing. Over time, we develop an internal picture of our partner, who they are, how they think, what they value, what they are capable of. This sense of knowing creates comfort. It allows us to move through the relationship with a sense of stability. We believe we understand the person beside us. But betrayal disrupts that picture almost instantly. When someone discovers that their partner has acted in a way that contradicts the image they held, whether through infidelity, secrecy, emotional withdrawal, or deception, the mind struggles to reconcile the two realities. The person who once felt predictable now appears unpredictable. The partner who once felt transparent now seems opaque. Psychologically, this creates a very particular experience. The feeling of living with someone who suddenly feels like a stranger. This does not necessarily mean that love disappears. In fact, many people continue to feel love even while experiencing deep confusion. But the certainty that once accompanied that love becomes fragile. Familiar gestures are reinterpreted, memories are reconsidered. People begin to ask themselves questions they never imagined asking before. Who is this person really? And perhaps even more unsettling, how well did I ever truly know them? Distance can create a similar transformation, though it unfolds more gradually. When partners spend long periods emotionally disconnected, absorbed in separate routines, careers, stresses, or responsibilities, they may slowly drift into parallel lives. Conversations become functional rather than revealing. Emotional intimacy fades quietly. Over time, the sense of truly knowing the other person begins to weaken. Two individuals can share the same home, the same daily routines, even the same responsibilities, yet feel as though they are observing each other from a distance rather than participating in a shared emotional world. And when this psychological distance grows large enough, something unexpected can happen. The person you once knew so well begins to feel unfamiliar, not because they changed dramatically, but because the relationship stopped evolving together. This experience of unfamiliarity has a complicated relationship with desire. On one hand, familiarity is essential for long-term relationships. It provides stability, safety, and emotional grounding. But desire has always had a more complicated relationship with familiarity. Desire often thrives on a balance between knowing and not fully knowing. Part of what makes desire alive is the sense that the other person still contains mystery, individuality, and complexity. We are drawn to partners not only because they are familiar, but because there are still parts of them we continue discovering. But betrayal disrupts this balance in a painful way. Instead of a playful or intriguing sense of mystery, the unfamiliarity feels threatening. Instead of curiosity, there is suspicion. Instead of fascination, there is uncertainty. The mind begins to analyze rather than explore. It looks for signs of danger rather than opportunities for connection. And in that emotional atmosphere, desire often becomes overshadowed by vigilance. This is one of the most difficult psychological transitions couples face after betrayal or distance. The relationship has shifted from a space of ease to a space of questioning. Yet, interestingly, the very experience that creates this distance can also open a surprising possibility, because once partners recognize that the person beside them is not exactly who they thought they were, a new kind of encounter becomes possible. Instead of assuming complete knowledge of each other, they are forced to acknowledge complexity. They begin to see each other not as fixed identities, but as evolving individuals. In some cases, this realization can become the beginning of a different kind of intimacy, one that is less based on assumptions and more based on curiosity. Curiosity is a powerful force in relationships. It invites us to ask questions rather than make conclusions. It encourages us to explore the inner world of the other person instead of reducing them to a single narrative. After betrayal or distance, rebuilding desire often begins not with certainty, but with curiosity. Who are you now? What have we each become during this period of disruption? What parts of ourselves have remained hidden, unexplored, or misunderstood? These questions are not easy. They require patience and emotional honesty, but they can gradually transform the experience of unfamiliarity from something threatening into something meaningful. Because the truth is that no long-term relationship survives on the illusion of complete knowledge. Human beings are constantly changing. Our desires evolve, our fears shift, our identities deepen with experience. The strongest relationships are not those where partners believe they fully know each other forever. They are the ones where partners remain curious enough to keep discovering each other. And sometimes, the moment when someone feels like a stranger is not only the result of distance or betrayal, it is also an invitation. An invitation to meet each other again, this time with fewer assumptions and deeper awareness. Because the moment you replace certainty with curiosity, the stranger beside you may slowly become someone you learn to know again, perhaps even more honestly than before. Once betrayal or distance has disrupted the sense of familiarity in a relationship, many couples fall into a very understandable pattern. They begin to focus almost entirely on the past, what happened, why it happened, who was responsible, and how the damage might be repaired. These conversations are important. Accountability matters. Understanding the roots of the rupture matters. But if a relationship becomes defined only by analysis and repair, something essential can quietly disappear. Curiosity. Curiosity is one of the most powerful psychological ingredients in desire, yet it is often the first casualty after betrayal or distance. When people feel hurt or uncertain, they instinctively move into positions of protection. They observe carefully, they monitor behavior, they ask questions designed to confirm safety, but these questions often revolve around control rather than discovery. Did you tell me everything? Can I trust what you're saying? Will this happen again? These questions are understandable, even necessary in certain moments, but they do not invite connection. They invite reassurance. And reassurance, while important for healing trust, does not automatically restore desire. Desire operates in a different emotional space. It lives where curiosity exists. It grows when people feel interested in each other again, when they sense that the person beside them still contains complexity, imagination, and emotional depth waiting to be rediscovered. After betrayal or distance, the challenge is that partners often stop looking at each other with curiosity. They begin looking at each other through a narrow lens defined by the rupture itself. One becomes the one who was hurt. The other becomes the one who caused the pain. And over time, these identities can harden. But no human being is only the worst thing they have done, nor only the pain they have experienced. When relationships become locked into these simplified identities, the possibility of rediscovery disappears. People interact not with the full person in front of them, but with the version of that person shaped by the wound. Rebuilding desire requires moving beyond this fixed narrative. It asks both partners to gradually widen their perception of each other again. This does not mean ignoring the betrayal or pretending the distance never happened. Rather, It means allowing space for a more complex understanding to emerge. The person who hurt you may also be someone capable of reflection, growth, and change. The person who feels wounded may also be someone rediscovering their own strength, boundaries, and desires. Curiosity begins when people allow themselves to see each other again as evolving individuals rather than static characters in a painful story. This shift is subtle but powerful. Instead of asking only, "Why did this happen?" partners begin asking different questions. Who are you becoming? What have you learned about yourself through this experience? What parts of you have I never truly understood? These are questions of discovery rather than interrogation. They open the possibility that the relationship itself can evolve into something more conscious than it was before. Interestingly, many couples who successfully rebuild after betrayal describe a similar realization. They say that the relationship they rebuild is not simply a return to the old one. It becomes something different, sometimes even deeper. Why? Because curiosity replaces assumption. Before the rupture, many relationships operate on a kind of autopilot. Partners believe they know each other completely. They assume they understand each other's motivations, desires, and emotional worlds. But these assumptions can create a quiet complacency. Curiosity disappears because everything feels predictable. Ironically, the disruption of betrayal or distance shatters that illusion of certainty. It forces both individuals to confront the reality that their partner is more complex than they once believed. While this realization can initially feel destabilizing, it also opens a door. If the person beside you is more complex than you thought, then there is still something to discover. Discovery is the oxygen of desire. Desire is not simply about physical attraction, it is about fascination. It is about the feeling that the person in front of you is not entirely known, that there are still aspects of them that can surprise you, challenge you, or intrigue you. When curiosity returns, something begins to shift in the emotional atmosphere of the relationship. Conversations become less defensive and more exploratory. Partners begin listening not just for reassurance but for understanding. They start noticing aspects of each other that had been overlooked for years. Slowly, the relationship regains a sense of vitality. And with vitality, desire often begins to reappear, not as a forced obligation, but as a natural response to renewed emotional engagement. Curiosity reminds us that long-term relationships are not static bonds between fixed identities. They are ongoing encounters between two evolving people. The moment partners allow themselves to see each other through that lens again, the relationship becomes a place of discovery rather than merely repair. And when two people begin discovering each other again, something remarkable can happen. Desire, which once seemed lost, can quietly find its way back, because nothing awakens attraction quite like the realization that the person beside you still holds mysteries worth exploring. And then we arrive at perhaps the most important question. Once trust has been shaken and distance has created emotional gaps, how do we actually move forward together? How do two people who have experienced betrayal or prolonged separation rediscover the sense of vitality that once defined their relationship? Because reclaiming desire is not simply about repairing what was broken, it is about creating something new. Many couples make the mistake of trying to return to the relationship exactly as it was before the rupture. They long for the old us, the version of the partnership that existed before the betrayal, before the silence, before the months or years of emotional distance. But the truth is, that version of the relationship is gone, and in many ways, that is not a tragedy. It is an invitation. Every significant crisis in a relationship creates a fork in the road. One path leads toward resentment, suspicion, and quiet disengagement. The other leads toward reinvention. But reinvention requires courage, because it asks both partners to stop pretending that the relationship can simply resume where it left off. Instead, they must become curious again. Curiosity is a powerful antidote to resentment. When we are hurt, we tend to reduce our partner to the worst version of themselves. The person who betrayed us becomes the betrayer. The partner who withdrew becomes the one who stopped caring. We lock them into a single story. But relationships cannot evolve when people are trapped inside fixed identities. So the work of rebuilding desire often begins with something deceptively simple, seeing each other again as complex, evolving individuals. Ask yourself, who is the person sitting across from me today? Not the person I married 5 years ago, not the person I felt betrayed by, but the person they are now. Because people change. Life changes them, pain changes them, growth changes them. And sometimes the distance that threatened to destroy the relationship also reveals dimensions of each partner that had been hidden before. Rebuilding desire also requires the reintroduction of emotional risk. After betrayal, many people protect themselves by becoming cautious and controlled. They avoid vulnerability because vulnerability once led to pain. They speak carefully, they share less, they keep their guard up. But desire does not thrive in emotional safety alone. Desire requires mystery, spontaneity, and a willingness to be seen. When partners begin to open themselves again, not just with explanations, but with emotional honesty, they create space for something unexpected to happen. They begin to experience each other not only as sources of past pain, but as potential partners in growth. This is why rebuilding desire is not purely about forgiveness. Forgiveness can release resentment, but it does not automatically restore aliveness. Aliveness comes from engagement. It comes from conversations that go beyond logistics and obligations. It comes from rediscovering playfulness, imagination, even flirtation. It comes from remembering that the relationship is not just a structure of responsibilities. It is also a living, breathing experience. Many couples who survive betrayal eventually say something surprising, that the relationship they built afterward became deeper than the one they had before. Not because betrayal is good, but because the crisis forced them to confront truths they had been avoiding. It pushed them to ask difficult questions about intimacy, autonomy, desire, and identity. They stopped performing the relationship they thought they were supposed to have and began creating the relationship they actually needed. And in that process, desire sometimes returns in an entirely new form. Not the naive desire of the beginning, when everything felt effortless and inevitable, but a more conscious desire, one that emerges from choice rather than illusion. This kind of desire is powerful because it is not based on perfection, it is based on awareness. Two people look at each other and recognize the flaws, the mistakes, the wounds, and still choose to engage, still choose to invest, still choose to explore the possibility of connection again. That is not weakness, that is emotional courage. And when two people commit to that process, something remarkable can happen. The relationship stops being defined by what happened in the past and starts being shaped by what they are building now. Because ultimately, desire is not something we simply find. Desire is something we create. It is created through curiosity, through risk, through the willingness to see our partner not as a fixed character in a painful story, but as a human being capable of transformation. Betrayal and distance can close the door on one chapter of a relationship, but they can also open the door to a deeper, more intentional one. The question is not whether the relationship can go back to what it was. The real question is whether you're brave enough to create something better than what it was before.